Hi, everyone. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you so much for joining us. And I was thinking, there's so much in the news these days about budgets and deficits. And I often wonder whether or not the average day American really understands when they say that America is still has a huge deficit. Some people like to say, well, Bill Clinton, when during his administration, he passed the baton on to the Bush administration. It was no deficit. But let me tell you, the deficit is something that has built up since the founding of this country. You put together a budget. It's just like a budget in your household. Actually, this is one of my favorite topics. Let's start with the household. You have a budget. You have discretionary spending. You have non-discretionary spending, and you have savings. There are some things that you absolutely in your budget you have to spend money on. You have to pay for utilities. You have no choice. You have to pay for water. You have no choice. There are certain fees that the city charges you because you live in the city for the upkeep. Some may call it the bid tax. And then you have the non-discretionary funds. You may use your funds to go to restaurants, go on vacation, go to basketball games and other sporting events. These are the funds that you don't necessarily have to spend, but you spend them out of pleasure and to have a balance in your life. Now, of course, you have to buy food and you have to buy liquids to survive. And then the third rail of that is that after this discretionary and the non-discretionary funds, you have your savings. How much, after all this is done and allocated, do you have left over for your savings? Well, let's go to the government. The government has its discretionary and non-discretionary funds. And unlike most average Americans, when the government is funded, when you funded a particular project, you're obligated and it's almost demanded that you spend that money because else that money will still go back to the federal government, unlike the average day citizen. What is unfortunate, though, is that you would think from all the taxes that is collected on everyday Americans, um, that the government would not be so much in deficit. And it's in deficit because every year there are just these exorbitant cost overruns. And let me give you an example. Obviously, in a budget, you're going to have to pay for the defense of your country. Um, you're going to have to pay the Social Security. There's just certain line items that you're going to have to pay. But there are other expenses like creating the Department of Homeland Security under the Bush administration, creating the Department of Education, creating the Department of Health and Human Services, which creates a humongous bureaucracy, which the taxpayers end up paying for, is something that's not really necessary. And also the National Park Service, we have to pay for the upkeep of the National Park Service. These are things that people like to enjoy. And what you don't understand is that billions and billions of dollars are spent on upkeep every year. But when you realize you have cost overruns, at some point you're going to have to say, well, I can't afford to add a department of this. I can't afford the upkeep of that. What the government has done is added to us, we're just going to print more money, print more money. And because the government continues to print more money, the deficit continues to rise. In fact, our government is 30% over its deficit. What does that mean? That we're between 1.3 trillion and 1.9 trillion dollars over budget. And every year, and even in Congress now, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid does not want to get the budget in control because they don't want to see the mess they have on paper to sort of make them practice fiscal and financial responsibility. So listen, you got to get your budget ordered in house, whether it's personally, whether it's professionally, or whether it's the government, or whether it's your home. If your budget is out of control, you have the kind of chaotic situation that you see in people's homes and the financial disaster that they're facing, and you also see it reflected back in our government that should set the example, but that it never will. We should have further discussions about this. I would love your comments, would love your feedback and your input on budgets, discretionary, non-discretionary spending, and savings. I'm Armstrong Williams. Have a blessed day.